The first tip when it comes to making your garments look professional is pressing. Press, 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 press. And when I say press, I don't mean sew the whole garment and then press it. No, I mean every single step of the way, press your garment, because it will help to really make crisp, clean edges, and it'll just like really lock everything in. And it's better to do it along the way, because then by the time you're done, you don't need to press it again, right? You could if you want, but you won't need to. You should invest in tools that assist with pressing. For example, a seam ham. It helps to get like, maybe let's say if you have like a collar that you want to press and it's kind of curved, or like an armhole seam, right? Like just things that are not necessarily flat. And a seam roller. And the purpose of a seam roller is for those moments where like you don't want to, or you can't physically take your garment to your iron and your iron board, but you want to flatten your seam. You can use a seam roller and literally just lay your seam flat open and then just roll over the seam with this seam roller. This will help. This is like an alternative to an iron. You should also invest in a pressing clap or pressing clapper. The significance of a pressing clapper is, let's say you have a garment that you really should not be like putting it under too much heat or any heat at all. A pressing clapper with the help of the steam from an iron helps to flatten the seam. Let's say if you're working on like a wool coat or something, or wool sweater, where you probably should not put that under your iron. What you can do is you can use the steam from your iron, put the steam over the seam, and then take your clapper and literally put the clapper on top of the seam, like right after you put the steam on the seam. The moisture from the steam paired with the wood, you know, the thickness of the wood, that combination will help to flatten the seam and kind of keep it in place without you having to use a hot iron. Do not skip the nitty-gritty techniques. I know. Believe me, when you're sewing something and you just want to finish because you want to try it on, you want to wear it, or you want to sell it and get it out of your face, or somebody's waiting for it, or you're tired and you're just over it because you've been working on it for so long. Whatever your reasoning is, believe me, I do understand the urgency of just wanting to be done with the project. And because of that, having like the tendency to skip over the nitty-gritty things. But please don't skip over the nitty-gritty things, because those nitty-gritty techniques are what help to produce a professional looking garment. When I say the nitty-gritty techniques, those techniques can be like notching, right? Like, you know, let's say if you're working on like a bucket hat, for example, and you're dealing with a curved edge, like putting notches in those curves so that when you sew, you know that the seam is going to lay flat, for example. Or another example of a nitty-gritty technique could be like edge stitching, right? Or top stitching. Like technically the garment is in place, you've sewn it together, and technically you don't need to, you know, do a top stitch, but aesthetically it does help. And also like it does reinforce the strength of the seam as well. Or things like trimming. And I just want to caveat, like, I know I'm giving these tips, but really I'm also talking to myself too, because some of these things are things that I don't do, or I like don't do consistently. So this is really me talking to a mirror with some people behind me, you know, and we're all in the mirror that I'm talking to. Another way that you can go about producing a professional looking garment is by taking the time to learn about different seam finishes. Learning about them can be as simple as going to the store, like whether it's a thrift store or like H&M or wherever, or go in your closet, heck, if you don't want to go out, and take some garments and look at them, flip them over to the wrong side, see what the seams are looking like, right? Do you see serger? Are the seams hidden? Is it a blind hem? Like study the different types of seam finishes there are by actually observing garments that you own or garments that are in a store. Some examples are a French seam, or using bias tape to like cover a raw edge, or like a rolled hem for something like chiffon or something like that, right? Because those kind of things really do help to set apart a professional looking garment versus a garment that looks like it was hand sewn. As much as it pains me to say this, because I feel like when it comes to art and art forms and creativity, like, I feel like there shouldn't be any rules. You should be able to do whatever you want. But the truth is, when it comes to fabric, not every fabric is for every garment type. So you want to be mindful about like the drape of a fabric or the weight of a fabric, right? If you're trying to make like a cowl neck dress, maybe you shouldn't use wool, because the drape of the fabric is going to affect the final look of the garment, and it might not match the vision you have design wise in your head. Paying attention to the drape and the weight, the heaviness, right? Like, is it going to be stiff when you're done? Do you want it to be stiff? If you do, then go with heavier fabrics, right? If you guys are finding these tips helpful, give me a thumbs up to let me know that these tips have been helpful so far. Another tip that I would offer is using quality interfacing. There are many different types of interfacing. It's not in every case that you want a stiff interfacing, right? Like, sometimes you need the reinforcement with a little bit of flexibility, So I would say take some time to look into different types of quality interfacing and how they pair with certain fabrics based on the design and the final outcome that you are going for. Another tip that you can keep in mind when you want to create a professional looking garment is taking the time to reflect on your process. And when I say your process, I mean your victories as well as your mistakes, because both are equally important, right? When I say reflect on your victories, like if it's your first time making a garment and it turns out really well, or even if not really well, but better than you thought, make note of it. Like, what did you do? Like, for example, I did this first, I did this next. I make sure my tension was on this, or my stitch length was this, right? Like, whatever worked, take note of it, especially if you're going to make that garment or something like it again in the future. And on the other side, record your mistakes too, right? Like, okay, this is my first time making a corset. I had trouble creating the boning channel. I had trouble building the cups for this corset. Write those mistakes or those struggles down, because the next time you're bored, and I think these days we're not really bored. I think it's impossible to be bored. But the next time you have some time on your hand, or the next time you decide to make the time, you can sit down and be like, you know what? I'm going to practice those mistakes that I had. I'm going to go and work on creating a channel for a corset, or I'm going to work on, putting together a bra cup, because that was a struggle for me. Or even if you don't practice it, but you just say, you know what, I have to make a corset in 3 days. So the last time I made a corset, I struggled with the bra cups and the channel. So let me take the time now ahead to just do a test run. So that way, when I have my final fabric, I can just hit the ground running, knowing what I need to do to avoid those mistakes, right? So reflection is definitely key throughout the sewing process. The final tip I would give, if you're someone who's looking to make your garments look more professional, and I guess this is more so for people who are interested in selling their garment, and this is a tip that I plan on really putting into practice, and that tip is practice it until you master it. By it, I really mean whatever it is that you decide you want to sell, right? So let's say, for example, if I decide, you know what, I want to create a collection of bustiers, right? And that collection is going to be 5 pieces, but they're all going to be bustiers. Maybe they'll have different patterns or different, notions or whatever it is, but they all will be bustiers. What I would do is I would take time to make at least 2 bustiers. The first one, I'm making it, I'm just going by like what I think I know, and I'm recording my process, my mistakes and my victories. And then the second time, I'm applying what it is that I reflected on, and by then I should have mastered it. Maybe enough to make a third one, right? But the point in that is, if there's something that you want to specialize in, the more you can practice it, the higher chance you have of mastering it. And the importance of mastering something is the time that you get back, right? When you master something, you no longer have to really like sit down and think about it and strategize and go back. Like, you literally can just sit down and be on autopilot. And that's what allows you to like create things and produce things more quickly, because you know, like, you don't have to think about it. Like, your body just knows what to do. It makes sense to invest the time beforehand. I know, like, maybe it will be annoying or boring or tedious or whatever to like keep making the same garment 3-4 times, but all that time that you're putting in the upfront is time that you won't have to worry about when you got a collection due in a week, or somebody's waiting for this piece in a couple days, right? You won't have to worry about that time because you already like invested it in the upfront timing. You know what I mean? The next time you sew something, what's the one tip of all these tips that you're gonna be like, all right, let me keep this in mind because Shania said yada yada bang bang, let me keep it in mind? Let me know, drop a comment, let me know. A recap here. Number 1 is to make sure you're pressing after every step of sewing and using the appropriate pressing tools. The second tip is make sure that you are implementing and making time to do the nitty-gritty techniques such as clipping and notching and edge stitching, top stitching and trimming, etc. The third tip was to take the time to learn about the different seam finishes and be intentional about them. So learning about French seams and rolled hems and bias tape and interfacing and being intentional with it. The fourth step was to be mindful about the fabric that you're choosing to use. Make sure that the fabric that you're choosing to use is in alignment with the design you have in mind, whether that is the weight of the fabric or the drape of the fabric, the stretch of the fabric, etc. Number 5 is make sure that you're using quality interfacing. If you choose to use interfacing, make sure that it is not too rigid or too lightweight, like that it makes sense for what you're making. And tip number 6 was to make sure that you're reflecting on your journey. So reflecting on your mistakes as well as your victories so that you can know what to do again versus what you need to practice on ahead of time before making a garment or similar garment again in the future. And then the final tip was, if there's one thing you want to focus on selling, if there's one thing you want to specialize in, like let's say that's bucket hats, right? Set a goal to make at least 2 of that type of thing that you're going to specialize in. Make 2 pieces of that. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you guys are all having a great week, and I hope you guys are warm and healthy and safe and in positive spirits, and I send so much love to you guys. Ciao.